What was the creepiest thing you thought was paranormal, but was actually much worse? When you discovered the truth, I became adamantly convinced that ghosts existed in middle school. And during my first year of high school, I knew there was one that stood in my room by the closet. One day, I had enough and began screaming at it in my head because I was upset that it was observing me. When a sudden weight descended on my head, and I realized that it was punishment. The ghost had been inside my head for years, and I kept quiet about it for fear that people would assume I was crazy or lying. In the interim, I lost almost all of my emotions, with the exception of fear, and the rest of them only went surface deep. I attributed both of these incidents to the ghost after I slept. It turns out that I was so quick to believe in ghosts because I have OCD, which makes me feel like I'm being watched all the time. The idea that ghosts are to blame fits in perfectly with how I interpret my surroundings, and this obsession is probably something my brain will always feed me. When it comes to the weight in my head, it's still there nearly 10 years later, and every doctor I've seen for it has shown no interest in helping after basic scans, and tests come back negative. If I ever find out what it is, I'll try to remember. To update, when I was younger, I used to have nightmares about my mother hovering over my bed by the window, staring down at my sister and me. I would get so scared and yell, "Mom, Mom," but she would never answer. I knew it wasn't my mom. When I was older, I told my aunt about it, and she assured me they weren't. My mother had severe mental health problems that worsened over the years, and occasionally she would have episodes of anxiety about something happening to us and guard us at night. Because of the traumatic death of her first child, which apparently triggered these dreams, she would also randomly visit our rooms to check on us. I now understand the full history of the disorder and can understand why it would cause any parent to experience such mental distress when we were younger, but I still shudder when I think of the blank-faced ST. I still tend to think of the nightmare mom as not being my mom, which is kind of sad because it is, and more, and I hope I could forget it, since she had joyful times in her life a long time ago, and that's really the only comfort. I didn't believe this was paranormal, but I did think it was weird, and it turned out to be more than I had anticipated. When I was 13, I had Amy mother gave me a small jewelry box with cushions for rings, and I kept 6 rings in it. They weren't valuable, but I thought they were silver and mood rings. I was a little neurotic as a child, and I had spent an afternoon organizing my room, placing the 6 rings in a certain order. One day, I opened the box and discovered that 2 of the rings weren't in order. Since there was no explanation for why I thought someone in my family had moved them, I asked them if anyone had touched them. They all said that no one had opened the box, but I was certain that someone had to have gone through it. My dad eventually searched our entire house for missing items, and the only items he found were an old bottle of hydrocodone from the medicine cabinet and some of my mom's. The discovery of gold jewelry in a bathroom drawer revealed that there had been a series of robberies in the neighborhood, where the burglars had only taken small gold items and prescription medications. There were no signs that the homes had been broken into, and items such as laptops, diamond jewelry, and other valuables had been left unattended. So my family would not have known anything was stolen. I read I'll Be Gone in the Dark about him, and the part about the robberies, and aside from the fact that I was so certain something was wrong. Was this not in California in the 1970s? Was it because the Golden State Killer first began breaking into houses and stealing small items? The idea that this guy could enter people's homes covertly and then return made me uneasy. As I approached my sophomore year of high school, I began to feel as though everything was going south, and that there was something invisible out there, force making my life miserable. It turns out that I have type 1 diabetes. When I first started to feel the symptoms of the condition in the second half of high school, my then boyfriend's health was getting worse and worse. He picked a fight with me on the phone while I was traveling to uni on the train over nothing. He was diagnosed with diabetes, and his blood sugar levels were measured at 5.5 molar liter, or 990 milligrams per DL, when I hung up on him because I was so angry the first time and something didn't sit right for no apparent reason. I called him back and asked if he wanted me to come over to your house and go to the doctor with him, Max's hospital measurements should be between 4 and 9. Even now, he still gets irrationally upset occasionally. And we argue until one of us clicks to check your blood sugar. To put it simply, diabetes is terrible and has a lot of negative effects on your life. I hope things are easier now that we live in this large, lovely city. There may have been more to it, but when I was a little child, my uncle helped us pack up everything and asked if we left anything in the farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, California. It was my first time having my own room, and my mom was devastated when the landlord evicted us after a few months, saying we needed the house back for the farmhands. When he got up there, he discovered my favorite Cabbage Patch doll hanging by its neck from the ceiling, with candles in a circle underneath it that had burned to wax puddles and cigarette butts on the floor. My attic mom said she had never been up there, but he was welcome to look. There was only one entrance through my bedroom. We never found out who did it or why, but my sister claimed one night to have seen the silhouette of a man standing in her doorway, watching her sleep. Mom was a single parent at the time, and she was completely okay with us moving out as quickly as possible after we conducted a seance up there with my toys. I wish I had a better ending for you. We didn't have a father figure or visiting relatives at the time, so I'm not sure where we were in California. Mom Delano confirmed that it was off of Walms Road, and there were many fields surrounding us that appeared to be apple orchards and grape vineyards. The location was as eerie as it seemed. Have pleasant recollections. And there's my sister's story that will make your hair stand up on the back of your neck. About 7 years ago, my family rented a one-story house. It was originally a larger house that was divided into two, and an additional family lived in the other part, with whom I didn't really communicate at night. After we moved out, I heard through the grapevine that the neighbor's child had been caught spying on the house. For a while, I thought there was a ghost that lived in the attic, and I would have trouble falling asleep without a light on. It sounded like knocks above the ceiling, but any entrance to the small crawl space between the ceiling and the roof was patched up. When the house was divided, the noises I heard were him moving around on his arms and knees up there, which did not happen to me. But it turns out that the new residents had broken a hole in his closet ceiling to access the crawl space and had been searching through holes he had bored in the ceiling overlooking the other part of the house. Occurred in my city when I was in high school. For several months, a family believed what was the creepiest thing you thought was paranormal, but was actually much worse. When you discovered the truth, I became adamantly convinced that ghosts existed in middle school. And during my first year of high school, I knew there was one that stood in my room by the closet. One day, I had enough and began screaming at it in my head because I was upset that it was observing me. When a sudden weight descended on my head, and I realized that it was punishment. The ghost had been inside my head for years, and I kept quiet about it for fear that people would assume I was crazy or lying. In the interim, I lost almost all of my emotions, with the exception of fear, and the rest of them only went surface deep. I attributed both of these incidents to the ghost after I slept. It turns out that I was so quick to believe in ghosts because I have OCD. Here are a few from recently. I've come to terms with the fact that I occasionally experience sleep paralysis and that I should ignore strange things that happen to me when I wake up. For example, I once woke up in the middle of the night to male voices arguing, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep when I heard my dogs begin to growl and bark. And then I heard my parents conversing and I heard worried voices and realized it wasn't sleep paralysis at all. When I woke up, I discovered a very inebriated father and son duo fighting outside our front window and cursing at us. When my dad told them to move on, the police were called. It was the same thing as before, except that AV was loudly tunneling into my room and tearing through the drywall. I'm sorry it happened to you. Most people don't understand how terrible it is. I try to ignore the sounds, the sensation of presences, etc., and just want to sleep. Sleep paralysis happens to me multiple times a week, and it's awful, but I feel a little better now because I hardly ever meet anyone who shares my experience. We were playing hide and seek in the park near her house when I was 7 years old. I recall that my friend and I were hiding in some large bushes when we heard rustling nearby, followed by heavy breathing. We assumed the seeker was close, so we knelt down further, but the rustling sounds were getting closer, and my friend's breathing became labored, and she screamed and fled from the bushes. I chased after her, and the other friends stopped playing and turned to face her. She kept screaming that something had touched her leg, so our other friends arrived, and I tried to calm her down, but she was freaking out as we all tried to talk. After she was gone, we heard strange footsteps and Aries breathing. Another friend then began talking about a shadow person who was rumored to be seen in the park. We started to walk back to my friend's house, but as we turned to look behind us, we couldn't see anyone. Nevertheless, we kept hearing Aries breathing and footsteps, and we became certain that the shadow was following us. We came to a stop at a stoplight that divided her neighborhood from the park, and while we waited, we could hear the breathing getting closer and closer. I recall that we took turns looking behind us, and I thought I saw a shape dart down in the large bushes that marked the sidewalk. It appeared as a black blur, like a shadow person. We all continued to look behind us when my friend pressed the crosslight button quickly, but nothing moved, and we could still hear breathing. The light turned green, and we ran across the sidewalk. When we reached the other side, we turned around, but there was nothing there. We ran to her house and spent the night there, terrified. When we returned the following morning, we discovered when we returned to the area we believed to be our hiding place at the park last night, we discovered an adult magazine with a knife pinning it to the ground. As an adult, it still gives me the chills to think about my friend and me being concealed in tall bushes. With a sick person approaching us, we assumed that if it had been a person, we would have seen more of them, but the walkway had tall bushes on either side, so it would have been easy to stay hidden. Logically, we also didn't know how long the adult magazine that was stabbed into the ground had been concealed in the bushes. A week prior to a classmate being abducted in the same vicinity, I believe that my friend and I were spared because we screamed and fled, and fortunately, there were 6 of us in the group. Yes, we were all between the ages of 7 and 8, and my mother was furious. We informed the police when she discovered that I was never permitted to return to her house after my friend let us go out alone, but they never provided us with any updates. This was prior to the kidnapping, and I hope the person who abducted us wasn't whoever was in the park with him out. And I don't trust going down any sidewalks with big bushes. The kidnapper was never apprehended, and our elementary school had a memorial made for him that is still there today. Was your classmate ever found? I apologize for being new to Reddit, but to give you an update, the kidnapped boy didn't have a fortunately. His body was discovered 6 weeks later, and our parents chose not to inform us of what had happened. Our elementary school paid tribute to him, but I never found out what had happened to him. I believe it was an predator because our school became extremely paranoid for the remainder of the year and pushed for stranger safety and what to do if you feel. The fact that I still don't know what happened makes it even more terrifying. This is the only strange or paranormal thing that has ever happened to me. I was 11 years old when I recently moved to a different city with my family. Because my father was in the army, we stayed there for a year. And fortunately, the army provided us with a good home in a complex designed for each home, had a spacious backyard, and was surrounded by 12-foot concrete walls. One Sunday, my family and I went shopping at the grocery store. My older sister accompanied us, and since my child was still a baby, I was going to be alone for a few hours. I was fine playing with my dog, though. I went to the backyard to retrieve my black socks, which were hanging to dry, because I remembered that I needed them for my school's Monday uniform, which looked like a suit and tie. I was getting tired of waiting for my socks, so I said aloud, "I'm really bored," but almost instantly after that, a young voice said, "Then let's play." I turned around to see my normally hyperactive golden retriever sitting quietly and staring at me. I quickly looked around to try to find the source of the voice, but the house to the right was empty and divided by the concrete wall. The voice was clear but not loud, and it didn't feel like it came from in front of me or any of my sides. The house on the left was more than 50 feet away. and behind the wall was a long wall with nothing but a steep hill and a house at the bottom. I fled for my life, hid under the covers in my parents' bedroom, and turned on the TV to maximum volume until they got there. I told them what had happened, and they had to calm down. I had no idea what it was, and I still can't put my finger on it today. I knew the children on the left, but their voices weren't the same as those of the house to the right, which I later discovered had no children, and there was no way a child could have climbed a hill and then a 12-foot wall with sharp glass at the top. I had a blind dog growing up, and she would bark at things that were there and things that weren't. One night, at around midnight, she woke up my mom and me because my dad is a heavy sleeper. I was about 9 years old when she woke me up, so I immediately fell back asleep. My mom then got up and ushered me back to sleep. She went back to sleep that same night when an arsonist set fire to a fortunately empty house for sale in my neighborhood. The house burned to the ground as he followed his footsteps in the snow. He then went between my bedroom and our garage, almost setting it on fire. Our dog and my mother woke up, which we believe scared him away and caused him to cross the street. I miss you, Oreo. You were a very good pup. Thank God for vigilant, loyal pets. They are amazing. Instead, he burned the neighbor's garage. He stood in their front yard and watched it burn. He then walked out onto the street, and they never caught his footsteps. I'm not sure if this really counts, but about 5 years ago, my brother called me and kept mumbling random words into the phone. I was too young to realize that he was possessed or something, but he had just woken up from a seizure. She was small, but she was the best guard dog ever. When he has a seizure, my brother gets really woozy and panicky. I'm terrified. Did he live alone? It's scary to think about that happening. How is he now? No. He lived with his now ex-girlfriend at the time, who wasn't home. Although he still gets seizures occasionally, they're mostly caused by his not taking care of himself. Always take his medications as directed. When I was younger, I was home alone in my mother's and my own townhouse. I had been downstairs in the living room when I suddenly felt uneasy, so I made the decision to go to my room. I had climbed about halfway up the stairs when I started to feel a terrible sense of dread. I ran up the stairs and locked myself in my room until my mother got home. But it wasn't until years later that I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I was terrified, and I turned to see the full silhouette of a man, head to toe, standing in the corner at the bottom of the steps. I could feel his eyes on me, even though there were no eyes. Mention that I've grown accustomed to the things I've seen and heard over the years, and the medication really helps. But I can still clearly recall that moment because it terrified me so much that I'll never forget it. I have a small dog that barks, and I was watching a scary movie alone at home one night when my dog ran to the back door and began barking wildly. After I got over my initial fear of ghosts, I realized that she probably needed to urinate, so I let her out. She immediately ran to a bush in the corner and kept barking at it. So I went outside to find out if it was a cat or something else. Nothing is there. So I pick up the squirrel and take her inside. When I turned to walk, I saw a shadow, so it's definitely a ghost now. So I folded and locked myself in my room while my dog kept barking at the window. The following day, a police officer arrived at my door after a woman next door was attacked in her backyard. The other house was broken into the night before while everyone was asleep. The burglar left nothing behind and was just wandering around when he was discovered. They believe the burglar entered the two houses through my backyard. This occurs frequently where I live. They try the front and rear door handles. A few months ago, someone tried to break in through the back room doors at night. I turned on the light and heard a bang and shuffling, but nothing happened. I went downstairs, and everything was fine the following day. So I went out back at the person. Try the windows. You can't leave anything open ever unless you're in the room. They'll come in even if people are home. The only sound I heard at 3 in the morning last week was them running right into my outdoor furniture as they attempted to flee. I heard sounds coming from outside my window where there is a ledge. Raccoons and cats are common in this neighborhood, and I always hear these kinds of sounds and never give them much thought. However, that night I felt strange, so I slowly walked over to my window and slowly opened the curtains, I looked around. For after about 5 minutes, I saw nothing and the noise had stopped, so I went back to bed. 15 minutes later, I heard it again, looked again, and went back to sleep. About 30 minutes later, I woke up for no apparent reason and noticed flashes of light coming from the gap in my curtain. I went to the window once more and saw 5 police officers outside my yard. When I went outside to see what was happening, I noticed that they were arresting a man wearing all black. It turned out that an off-duty police officer had just happened to be driving by and noticed this man lurking and looking into people's homes. The theory is that he was trying to figure out which house was the easiest to break into. When I was 10 years old, I knew a boy who lived alone with his father up a dirt road in the middle of the woods. We were fairly close friends, and one summer, everyone in our rural area thought the father was really strange. The younger kids thought he was a monster, a zombie, or something, because he smelled terrible and had the most repulsive breath, and he would look at the children with a lot of creepiness. When I was 14, I discovered that my friend was not the creepy guy's son, but that the creepy guy had actually abducted him when he was around 7 years old and had been holding him captive in the woods, repeatedly grabbing him. My friend also turned 14 at the time I did this, was reportedly too old to appeal to the spooky father, who immediately abducted another young boy from a town about 70 miles away and brought him back to the cabin where he lived with my friend. He even attempted to pay a lost adolescent I knew, who had a juvenile record, to take my friend into the woods and murder him so he could be by himself with his new victim, who was, I believe, 5 years old. My friend realized that the same thing had happened to him. He had been brainwashed for 7 years and told that his parents no longer wanted him and that they had given him to the creepy guy for adoption. He waited until the creep went to work, picked up the little boy, and hitched a ride. Going about 40 miles to, it was widely reported, a TV movie was filmed, etc. So the creepy, smelly old weirdo was truly a monster. He died in prison, and that was a happy day. This wasn't Stephen. The closest police station spared the child from a horrific fate, and he ended up returning to the family he'd been stolen from 7 years earlier. If my memory serves me correctly, Stainer was abducted and mistreated as you described. He assisted in saving the child who was his abuser's next victim, and for that, despite his apparent and understandable distress, he was a hero. The story ended tragically, and he passed away at a young age after, I believe, someone T-boned his motorcycle and his biography. In addition, my brother killed a vacationing mother, daughter, friend, and former co-worker. To give you a brief overview of this story, a previous owner had passed away in one of my childhood homes, and strange things happened there that drove my dog and me crazy, but it got really spooky when my sister, who slept in the basement apartment, and started claiming that someone was watching her at night. We eventually discovered an old camera hidden in the walls and discovered that the previous owner had been arrested for spying on the girl who rented his basement apartment. I'm not sure how we can tell when we're being watched. It's a strange feeling. We are aware of more than our conscious minds can process. For example, if there are 200 people in a room, we can theoretically hear most of them, but only be consciously listening to one at a time. In this instance, I assume the camera was in her field of vision, but she didn't see it. Instead, she saw her. The lights in my brother's room were on when I got home around the age of 12. Since we never leave those lights on, it might have been either my brother or my mother, but one was in the bedroom. This was something that my subconscious mind processed when I was around 12. I was a little alarmed while the other was at work, but I tried to calm myself by claiming that I might have left them on before leaving. Then, I turned to see 2 wooden spoons on top of the cabinet in our kitchen, and even though I was positive I hadn't left any spoons there, I didn't recognize those 2 spoons, which is when I realized that someone, long story short, I had been inside our house a few days before I lost my keys, and my neighbor, who was about my age, found them. Instead of returning them, he kept them to himself. Days later, his mother asked him to deliver something to my mom, but no one was home, so he used his keys. We would never have discovered that he had broken into our home if he hadn't left his mother's wooden spoons there. I believe he also took money from us, My uncle purchased a property that was about 150 years old as a renovation project. Up the stairs, you could turn left or right. Left led to many bedrooms, and right had a landing and another bedroom beyond it. If you tried to take the dog upstairs, she would scream and flee. My cousin claimed that the bedroom on the right was haunted, which is why the dog was so scared. Later, when we were renovating the house, we discovered that the right landing was structurally unstable, and we now wonder if the dog was aware of this or if there was something more sinister going on. Wood creaking makes a lot of INF noises, so it's possible the dog could hear the structural weakness. It was spring, and I thought it was strange that it wasn't nearer the trailhead, but I ignored it, and we began on the peaceful frosty trail, which was lined with hard, crunchy rocks. My boyfriend and I had planned to hike a semi-popular trail on the outskirts of town, and when we pulled into the parking lot, there was only one other car. When we stopped suddenly, I heard a shuffled step that was off rhythm and delayed coming from the woods next to us. My heart stopped, and I held my breath to listen. I'm a very scared and anxious person, so at first I thought it was all in my head. It was snowing, and as we were walking out of sight of the parking lot, I started hearing echoing footsteps that my boyfriend hadn't, but he assured me that he had his pistol holstered and would protect me, so I said, "Okay," and we kept walking until the sound of footsteps faded into our own, and then a twig broke in the woods next to us. My boyfriend's eyes darted to mine, and I stammered aloud. We're being followed by an animal in the woods, but we both knew it wasn't an animal. If you're lucky and downwind, you'll smell a bear before you ever see it, and if you do hear it, you'll hear the loud huffs and grunts that the bear wants you to avoid. This was not an animal, and for some reason, telling the stalker that I knew they were after us seemed like a bad idea, not to mention truly terrifying. I had previously been followed on the street and was the kind to avoid eye contact in an attempt to stop the situation from getting worse, so I reasoned that it would be best if we played dumb and left. It was strange, but there are a lot of strange people in that state, so maybe it was nothing. A month later, a girl my age was abducted from that area, and when they caught the man who took her, he admitted to torturing her. I'm all for it. So, we turned around and half ran to our car, watching over our shoulders the whole time. She was brutally murdered, and her body was dismembered. But he had spent weeks searching for a couple to torture and murder, just like the numerous couples he had previously killed. The town was enthralled with the news coverage, and he lived among us, and he could have killed any of us. Small town, but when he was interviewed, he revealed that the park where we had been stalked had been one of his favorite hunting locations. He nearly took a couple before realizing that the man was an off-duty police officer. My boyfriend wasn't a police officer, but his gun, his work boots, and the way he carried himself could definitely be interpreted that way. I had a gut feeling that we were being followed, but I was unaware that the person tracking us was a serial murderer looking for couples in the Gulf of Mexico. My mom lives in Mexico near the Texas border in the Gulf of Mexico, and she also lives near a military post. There are a lot of violence, shootings, and hangings on the bridge with no heads act, so I spent about 3 months visiting my mom, having traveled to Mexico multiple times. I became accustomed to seeing the Mexican Army and Marines riding around town with large guns and hearing bizarre local tales. I also know how to blend in with the locals so I don't stand out while I'm there. One day, when I was by myself at home, I went outside to feed and pet my mom's two cats. It was already getting dark when I heard a very loud scream between a human and an animal. I was terrified, thinking it might be a ghost, a lone person, or someone being tortured by some kind of cartel, so I went back inside. The following day, I only went outside to feed the cats. During the day, I didn't hear anything, but as I was feeding them at night, I noticed the Mexican military passing in front of my mom's house. It was a routine checkup on the neighborhood, and the noise resumed, but they weren't confronted by it at all. When my mother returned, I told her about the extremely loud scream and screaming noises, and she began laughing at me. She explained that at the end of the neighborhood lived a wealthy narco person who owned a ranch, and that I was even more terrified because I thought someone was being tortured. and the Mexican army was ignoring it, which is very common here. I apologize for poor grammar, but when I first started college, my friends and I would spend a lot of time at my friend's dad's house, who lived in the country. Late at night, he had peacocks that would make the most terrifying noises at night. My poor family still teases me about it today. One late fall night, maybe at 1 or 2 in the morning, we decided to drive out to this radio tower just out of curiosity. It was in the middle of a large field with one entrance, which just so happened to be open. Scanning the horizon allowed you to see all the stars, but it wasn't like the city. You could also see a radio tower maybe a few miles away from there. We drove about a quarter of a mile to the radio tower. When we arrived, we saw a rusty, dilapidated car underneath the tower that appeared to have been abandoned for years. We pulled to the opposite side of the tower and relaxed for a while, listening to music and discussing whatever was on our minds. Until one of my friends pointed, he said, "Does it look like there's a light in there?" We all looked at the car, and sure enough, there was a dim light coming from behind the dust-covered windows. We put our car in drive and left right away, though it was a field, so naturally we moved slowly. The same friend who pointed out the light and saw that the car began to move slowly in our direction, without using its headlights. But the light inside the vehicle appeared to glow brighter at that point. My friend driving screamed and took off, faster than I had ever seen, leaving the junk car in the dust, literally, and ever since refer to this story as the ghost car story. We probably don't believe in ghosts, but the paranormal is better than anything else. A few years later, we discovered that the local sheriff's office was routinely monitoring that field for large drug deals that reportedly took place there. Had we stayed any longer that night than we did, we might have actually been killed. This was also the time when we watched a lot of Breaking Bad. So looking back, it seemed to us that that might have been the most likely outcome of that night. Fortunately, none of us were harmed, and my friend lived up in Thesapitches. Black Windy Hills is about 20 minutes from any ambient city lights. One night, while driving up to see him, I came to a stop sign. I looked left and right, but no one was there. I then turned left, and after waiting for a moment, a man stepped into the street about 10 feet to the right. When I got to my friend's house, I was convinced that I had seen a ghost and was freaking out about it. I slammed on my brakes right away, and he just stood there with my car lights hitting him and not moving. I drove slowly around him, and he kept facing forward as I passed, not turning his head to look at me or make eye contact. To explain the man I saw, and when I did, he told me it was a pedo who had moved in down the street with his parents after being released from prison. In the middle of nowhere, a man stepped in front of my car, and I thought it was a ghost. But it turned out to be a convicted felon who had just been released from prison. Perhaps he wanted him to run him over and kill him, depending on how old the victim was. It might have been a ruse to get her to get out of the car and jump onto the bonnet of a small knock, big scream, so she gets out and goes to him, or he might have said, "You need to drive me to the hospital," and he got inside the car, etc. Yes, I was 16 at the time. So learning that it was a predator was much worse than ghost. My family owns a farm that is quite remote. There are other houses nearby, but they are mostly deserted. When I was 17, I spent a winter break there by myself. My dad and brother would visit on the weekends because it was Christmas break from school, and I cooked some meat in a smoker next to my house, which is like a separate shed. In any case, it is approximately 3 in the morning in the pizza oven, where we smoke and dry the meat and store the logs and wood for the home's fireplace. As I make my way from the house to the smoker, I'm enjoying the sound it makes, which is similar to pouring sugar into a bowl. It's nighttime and has been snowing for a few days. The first layer of snow has frozen, and the wind is blowing fresh snow on top of it. I pause and take in the sound as I check on I make sure the fire and smoker are out, get more firewood for the house, and go to bed. I lock the door and enter the house, but I can still hear the noise it makes when it hits the surface. Once inside, I place the firewood next to the furnace and step outside onto the porch to dispose of the fire's ashes in the trash can. After that, I hear complete and total silence. At first, there seems to be no more snow, but it's still falling the same way as it did a minute ago. Suddenly, I feel as though something is up, and as I turn my head in fear, I'm expecting something to happen, and the hair on my arms and neck has already stood up. Then, I hear a faint song that sounds like a woman lulling a baby to sleep, although it's quite quiet and far away. I am frozen in place as this song reverberates from the woods and somewhat throughout the house. I don't expect anyone to jump out, but I'm not sure where the noise is coming from. So I dash to the house and lock myself in the bedroom. The house is close to it is 3 a.m., and it has been snowing in the woods. I can't go because I'm afraid that no one will ever approach the house. I went to bed, shut myself in the bedroom, and remained there till morning. I heard no noise, and nothing happened. Once more, I realized that the noise ceased when I rushed inside, and a few days later, my dad arrived. He would spend the weekends with on Mondays. He simply shrugged it off and said it might be time to return home, so I went home with him. I never went alone in that house again after meeting him. That Monday, since I didn't learn what actually occurred, the farm is located in a tiny community with a large elderly population, some of whom live alone. One elderly woman went missing that winter by herself, but no one reported it because she had no relatives or acquaintances to alert anyone. She probably suffered a stroke at some point because she lived in a little house without power on the far edge of the forest. Pointer required more assistance as she made her way through the woods toward our house. Since our house's lights were up, it was visible at night. Thus, that could be the reason she attended, but she might also have remembered because my grandma was a sort of village doctor. The elderly woman, unable to talk, tried to stroll through the woods and fell into a hole because she needed aid. Resembling a dried-up river basin, became trapped there and passed away. A few months later, she was discovered in the woods, I will always remember the sound she produced, which was about 2 miles from our house and sounded much like an old lullaby. I'm not sure if I imagined it or if the stroke caused it, but I wasn't feeling well for a while. I'm very sorry, weighed heavily on you. I hope you're okay now, or at least better. It was more terrifying before you learned the truth, because it was implied that I was either insane or had a near-death experience when I was 17. Choices or ideas to consider, but after learning what actually transpired, I immediately came to the conclusion that thinking about how bad things can get, I blamed myself and attempted to walk away from the farm the following time. The forest is quite difficult because it used to have this old lady's house for hours in a straight line, so I put it to rest, river flowing through it therefore. There are still some deep holes, large rocks, and other debris where the river flows was difficult, even for me, to do on a hot day. Life has a way of erasing the frightening things by providing you with just enough fresh ideas to consider.